Thank you. I can't take credit, but thanks. It's a privilege and an honor to introduce our guest, our luncheon speaker this afternoon, someone I've admired for a real long time, and I was real happy that he was able to accept our invitation to come here. He's a frequent contributor to Playboy, American Spectator, one of my favorite newspapers, Investor's Business Daily. He's written... Oh, yeah. You like that one? He's written for the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, The New Republic, Newsweek, Washington Post, Washington Times, Reader's Digest, and on and on and on, many other publications. He was the co-recipient in 1995 of the Thomas Zass Award. Did I pronounce that right? Thank you. Okay, Zass. For civil liberties work, awarded by the Center for Independent Thought. He also received the 1996 Freedom Fund Award from the Firearms Civil Rights Defense Fund of the National Rifle Association. His 1994 book, entitled Lost Rights, The Destruction of American Liberty, received the Mencken Award as Book of the Year from the Free Press Association. So a lot of kudos behind him. His most recent book, published last year, is Freedom in Chains, The Rise of the State and the Demise of the Citizen. It has been hailed as a modern-day libertarian classic, and the man himself is a modern-day libertarian classic. So please join me in welcoming to our Saturday luncheon, James Bovard.
I want to say thanks to Juan for the kind words. I appreciate that. It's always great to get out to California. Things are so different out here. I flew out yesterday, just missed the bad weather in D.C., and came in through LAX. And I had a few extra minutes there, so I was kind of hanging around, and I saw a proud member of the LAPD. So I walked up and started chatting with him, and after a few minutes, I asked if he had any extra throwdown guns he wanted to sell. Now, in case a throwdown gun is an extra gun the cop keeps in case he shoots an unarmed suspect, then he can throw down the gun. Well, it was a clean shoot. The guy had a gun, so that's where the term throwdown gun comes from. And so I chatted with the cop for a few minutes, and it was obvious to him that I didn't mean any harm, So we stepped aside, and he showed me what he had. He had a couple different ones. He had a pretty nice .38 Special. It was probably about 25 years old. It was the one drawback. It was a five-round cylinder instead of a 6-round cylinder. So that was, he was asking $230, and I offered $175. Only problem was that he wasn't willing to take American Express. So I guess the cops are not fully equipped in L.A. yet. So. It's a funny thing about this police scandal in L.A. I was reading yesterday that the mayor has proposed setting aside all the money that L.A. is going to get from the settlement from the lawsuit against the cigarette companies to save that to pay off all the lawsuits for the people that were robbed, beaten, killed, framed by the LAPD. There's such a poetic justice here. You got the politicians out here robbing, and it's supposed to compensate the people that were robbed by the police. This could be a real full employment industry for the law enforcement and the politicians. But the thing I'm concerned about, I hope no one looks at what happened there at the LAPD. I hope it doesn't make anybody cynical. Because John McCain is right. There's nothing worse than a cynical young person that loses faith in their leaders, and it's terrible when people tell these things about politicians. It just breaks my heart as much as it does John McCain's. It's interesting. Politicians often talk about government as if government was some kind of hovercraft which floated gently above the lives of the people it sought to help. In reality, government is more like a lumbering giant bulldozer that rips up the soil and ends up clear-cutting the lives of people it was supposed to help. It's the threat of government punishment permeates everyday life. The number of people in prison in this country now is 500% higher than it was in 1971. Almost 10% of American males will end up in prison at some point in their lives, according to a Justice Department 1997 report, based on the current trends. Trusting government nowadays means splitting people into two classes: those who can be trusted with the power to run other people's lives, and those who cannot be trusted with the power even to run their own life. The first duty of the government, the first duty of the citizen is to assume the best of the government at the same time the government assumes the worst of him. In order to get a sense of all the different things, some of the different things the government is up to right now, I'd like to take a look at some of the Clinton administration success stories. Back in 1994, President Clinton said, "The Americans with Disabilities Act is a national monument to freedom." Actually, the ADA symbolizes a freedom based on maximizing the number of legal clubs that favored people can use against everybody else. This is an act which is administered by the EEOC. God save us all. And the EEOC keeps stretching the meaning of disability, mental disability especially. For instance, in 1997, the EEOC came up with freedom for people to arrive at work late. The EEOC issued rules which says that employers may now be obliged to accommodate workers who are taking Prozac or other antidepressants by letting them arrive late in the morning. And the employers have to allow time off for workers who say they are stressed and depressed because they're basically making a Disabilities Act claim. And it's curious, the most common Disabilities Act claim right now under mental disability is claiming to be unhappy, depressed. And now they've got special legal rights. What's happening with the EEOC, with the ADA also is that the access police are trolling the land to try to find violators. For instance, the city of Bellevue, Washington, threatened to levy a $4,500 fine on a strip club, and the reason was the strip club did not have a wheelchair lift attached to the stage for the strippers. You know, there was it was a funny case. I don't know if the ADA officials were encouraging a different kind of strip show, but you know, this is the stuff which is coming down. There was a deaf lady in Santa Monica who sued Burger King. She claimed that its drive-through windows were a violation of law because they were biased against deaf people. Burger King settled the lawsuit by setting up a bunch of visual electronic ordering devices at 10 restaurants. There was a guy in Illinois, Robert Johnson. He was fired from a position as a telemarketer, and because he was fired because the company said that he mumbled too much during the phone. Johnson sued his employer, claiming that the company was biased against him because he was missing 18 teeth. And a federal appeals court ruled in his favor. That's the thing which is really bizarre in some of these cases. There was the Department of Transportation, Federal Department of Transportation, proposed in 1998 to ban peanuts on airlines because some people have peanut allergies. Some schools have banned all children from bringing peanut butter in sandwiches because other children are allergic, and who knows, somebody might take a bite of somebody else's peanut butter. It's amazing. Americans are increasingly caught in the crossfire between federal agencies. A couple months ago, OSHA proposed new rules to try and protect workers from carpal tunnel syndrome. These are very expensive new rules. Estimates say that they cost $15 billion a year to enforce, to comply with, and it's not even clear that the new rules would actually prevent carpal tunnel syndrome. The EEOC, on the other hand, is doing its best to try to save the jobs of orthopedic surgeons. There was a case in '97. The EEOC sued a company in Indiana because the company withdrew an offer to be a cashier to someone that they found out was suffering from carpal tunnel syndrome. EEOC said that was biased against the handicapped. The EEOC has spent 5 years fighting the Rockwell Corporation because the company administers nerve tests to potential assembly line workers at an auto plant to determine how likely they are to get carpal tunnel syndrome. EEOC says this is a violation of those people's rights. And there's other cases the EEOC is getting involved with. There was a Northwest Airlines fired an airline pilot who was caught flying a passenger jet drunk. I mean, it was a pretty clear case. The fired pilot entered a rehab program and then got his job back after he threatened to sue for a violation of the Disabilities Act, because former alcoholics have got special protections under the Disabilities Act, as do former drug users. But the law is very vague as far as what is former. You know, does it mean last night? Does it mean 2 months ago? I mean, you know, it's funny, but this is the kind of stuff which is federal courts are arguing about. And the EEOC and the Justice Department have done nothing to clarify this. Talk a few minutes here about drug policy. Since 1993, almost 4 million Americans have been arrested for marijuana violations, the vast majority for simple possession. More people were arrested for marijuana violations in 1998 than were arrested for murder, rape, and robbery combined. And it's amazing to see how interventionist and arrogant drug policy is, especially under Clinton. In 1997, the comedy show Murphy Brown featured the star suffering the after effects of chemotherapy. A friend gave her some marijuana to help her control the vomiting and boost up her appetite. The chief of the DEA publicly scorned CBS for doing a great disservice, and he even talked about investigating the network to see if any laws were broken. It's funny to see how the Clinton people have responded to chemotherapy, basically. It's almost as if federal drug policy is being haunted by the specter of chemotherapy patients wasting away finding something to curb their pain. It was great that California passed Proposition 215 and made it legal for medical marijuana for people suffering medical conditions that needed that. But it was fascinating to see how far the federal drug czar went to fight that, to see how outspoken he was. Federal law prohibits federal politicians or any government federal employees from getting involved in state politics. You wouldn't have known that with the fight over Proposition 215. I mean, they just threw that law out the window and just went whole hog doing everything that they could. And once it passed, drug czar McCaffrey's office put out a press release warning that the passage creates a significant threat to the drug control system that protects our children. And General McCaffrey sneered at the claims of marijuana's benefits, saying it was Cheech and Chong medicine. You know, it's a shame to see that Cheech and Chong don't get any respect these days, you know? I mean, what is this country coming to? You know, back in the 70s, early 80s, they did great work. And now a drug czar makes joke of them, for God's sake. Now, it's the feds have gotten very frustrated because they haven't quite won the drug war yet, and there are a few things more dangerous than a frustrated drug warrior. In 1998, Congress appropriated $23 million to the USDA to go out and try and create new funguses that would wipe out the coca and marijuana plants. Politicians claim that this could be the silver bullet to win the war on drugs. Environmentalists are horrified. They've seen this before. But the Florida drug czar, late last year, started tests to try and create a new marijuana-eating fungus. And it's amazing how uncontroversial some of the new federal policies are that are so much more aggressive. For instance, in the old days, the U.S. Coast Guard used to be known for out there, you know, if someone's had a boat was sinking, the Coast Guard might pull them in, unless they were Cuban or Haitian or something like that, and then they might, you know, do worse. But last year, Coast Guard sharpshooters on helicopters began firing at boats of suspected drug smugglers, and they're doing this in international water, not just along the U.S. coast. They're doing it throughout the Caribbean. There was in the news story in this, there was a funny comment. There was one of the sharpshooters insisted that we are still very concerned. We're still trying to be humanitarian, knowing that the helicopters carry life rafts for survivors in case the Coast Guard sinks one of the targeted vessels. Now, politicians are most enthusiastic on the drug war with one exception, and that is their own family members. In June 1993, Richard Raleigh Jr., the son of Education Secretary Richard Raleigh, received a sentence of 6 months house arrest for conspiring to sell up to 25 grams of cocaine and 100 grams of marijuana. 7 months earlier, Raleigh had been indicted by a federal grand jury in South Carolina and charged, along with 18 other people, with a bunch of drug charges that could have gotten him 10 years to life. But all he got was 6 months of house arrest, and his father went on to become one of the most prominent anti-drug spokesmen in the Clinton administration. Cindy McCain, the wife of John McCain, Senator John McCain, in 1994, she admitted that she had stolen Percocet and other barbiturates from the American Voluntary Medical Team, an organization that she ran, created to aid third world countries. Now, Percocet is a Schedule II drug. That's a very high-risk drug in the DEA's schedule of evils, basically. It's in the same category as opium. And each pill theft carried a penalty of up to 1 year in prison and a large monetary fine. It looked like McCain either admitted or was clear she had stole hundreds of pills over the years, and according to press reports from Arizona, she had also had prescriptions written for some of her employees and gotten the pills for them. She could have faced very harsh penalties if she'd been a poor Hispanic lady or a poor black lady, but she was a very wealthy wife of a senator, and instead of being prosecuted, she was allowed to enter a pretrial program and escaped with no blemish on her record. And apparently has done nothing to dim her husband's support of the drug war. Here locally, the son of Randy Duke Cunningham, a couple years ago, he was caught with something like 700 pounds of marijuana. He was smuggling across the country. The congressman's son managed to get off with a relatively light sentence because the prosecutors figured that since he was from California, the 700 pounds was probably for personal use. And perhaps the most special treatment that was granted to a member of a politician's family was the son of Vice President Al Gore. A few years ago, it was heavily reported in the British press and elsewhere that 13-year-old Al Gore, number 3, was caught smoking marijuana by school authorities at the very exclusive St. Albans School in the D.C. area. The Gore son was suspended as a result of the offense, but his father managed to suppress the story. Vice President Gore got on the phone, called a lot of the media bigwigs in D.C. Almost nobody in the American press wrote about it. It was written up in the British press, something I wrote about in Playboy a couple years ago, but almost everybody has ducked the story, and it has not come back to haunt Gore whatsoever. Speaking of the drug war, it's hard to consider the evils of that without talking about forfeiture, asset forfeiture. In 1998, the Justice Department confiscated 42,454 cars, boats, houses, stacks of cash, and other items that were worth $604,514,733. You know, I kind of wonder about that exact $33, but the feds, they're very proud of their paperwork for these programs. Federal agents can come in and seize a person's house, car, boat by invoking over 200 different federal statutes, and the feds don't need any proof of a criminal wrongdoing. Probable cause is a standard which can be hearsay, gossip, rumor, whatever. It works out, it saves a lot of paperwork that way. Forfeitures are often based on the word of a confidential informant who are often ex-convicts, and these confidential informants get up to 25% of the money the government seizes. There was a case in Los Angeles, 1998. One informant in a customs service entrapment scheme against the Mexican banks. This one informant got $2 million for his bank, $2 million for his work. He got better paid than Bill Clinton, and no, I won't make that joke. I'll try and show respect to the federal chief of state here. And there are so many different laws now that people might not know about. For instance, there's a law, bank secrecy law, that says that if you're leaving this country and you've got more than $10,000 in cash, you have to notify the Customs Service. You have to notify the U.S. government. I mean, this is a law that's often not written up any place. It's almost covert, but the government is going after people more and more on this. In 1997, 14 employees of Bob's Space Racers, a circus from Florida, crossed into Canada from North Dakota. The circus employees were paid in cash. And what happened was that the Customs Service decided to take all these 14 employees and added up all the cash that they had among the 14 of them, and it exceeded $10,000. So the Customs Service said, these guys violated the law, and they seized the money. Well, Bob's Space Racers got a Washington lawyer who got some of it straightened out. The Customs Service eventually gave the employees back 75% of their money after they promised not to sue the government for the original seizure or for keeping the other 25%. This is the kind of deal that the feds do all the time. In order to get back your confiscated property, you have to promise not to sue them. There was one customs currency seizure led to the biggest forfeiture defeat yet at the Supreme Court. The Customs Service in 1994 seized $357,000 from a Syrian immigrant who was searched at LAX before he went back to Syria. This is a guy who had lived here a number of years. It was money that was profits from his 2 gas stations and loan repayments for his Syrian relatives. He and his wife had hidden the money deep in their luggage and deep on them because both of them feared that overseas custom agents might steal it if they found it. Now, both the federal district court and an appeals court concluded that the money was honestly acquired and ordered almost all of it to be given back to this Syrian immigrant. The Clinton administration was determined that the fact the money was untainted was irrelevant. The administration insisted that it could seize the money even simply because the immigrant failed to fill out a federal form disclosing that he was taking more than $10,000 out of the country. There were some fascinating oral hearings before the Supreme Court in this case. There was the Clinton administration had a lawyer by the name of Irving Gornstein who went before the Supreme Court justice and announced that money that is not reported, quote, and is more than $10,000, this is dangerous money. We have a dangerous situation on our hands. Well, one wonders if the currency is so dangerous, why does government print so much of it? And some of the Supreme Court justices were a little skeptical, and Gornstein was asked whether the government was entitled to confiscate any property that was involved in a violation of law or regulations. And Gornstein said, I would accept that one small category of cases where perhaps the property is involved in what might be a minor infraction, such as a parking offense. This is the Clinton administration's idea of due process and having limits on government. And he says this, and some of the justices said, well, okay, fair enough. But happily, the Supreme Court, led by Clarence Thomas, shot down the Clinton administration on this one, but that hasn't happened very often. There's a 1996 case involving John Bennis, which you all might have heard about. He was a steel worker who was driving home from work. He picked up a prostitute on off of Detroit Street, and cops swooped down upon the two of them as she was, in the words of the Baltimore Sun, quote, performing a sex act on him. This is pre-Monica Gate, so the phrasing was much more delicate, and because he was caught in the act, the cops seized his car. It was business as usual in Detroit, where they seized nearly 3,000 cars in 1995 because of guys patronizing hookers. Well, it turned out that the co-owner of this 1977 Pontiac was one Tina Bennis, John Bennis's wife, and she was outraged that the city confiscated the car because she didn't have anything to do with it. Well, they had arguments before the Supreme Court on this one, and it's fascinating. I was going back and reading some of the briefs recently, and it turns out that the Clinton administration Justice Department blamed Tina Bennis for her husband's illicit use of the auto. The official brief from the Clinton administration said that Tina Bennis, quote, did not prove that she took all reasonable steps to prevent the illegal use of the car. Miss Bennis claimed only that she lacked actual knowledge that her husband would use the car illegally, unquote. And the Clinton brief asserted that because a security guard testified at the original trial that he had seen John Bennis talking to prostitutes twice in that neighborhood on two prior occasions, Tina Bennis, quote, should have known that John Bennis was likely to use the car illegally. Now, for some reason, the White House did not invoke the same doctrine in 1998, or else Hillary would have been blamed for Bill Clinton's mentoring in the Oval Office. Unfortunately, the Bennis case had an unhappy ending. The Supreme Court gave its blessing to the seizure. The Chief Justice, who wrote the majority opinion, based his decision heavily on an 1827 case involving the seizure of a Spanish pirate ship that had attacked the U.S. ships. The true story. And unfortunately, the Chief Justice did not deign to explain the legal equivalence of piracy in the 1820s and oral sex in the 1990s. And Clinton's Justice Department has fought tooth and nail to preserve these forfeiture laws. Starting in 1993, there was a joint bipartisan effort to try and curb some of the worst abuses, not fix them, but just make them a little bit less worse, a little less bad. Justice Department has derailed that at every point. They have argued before the Supreme Court to maximize forfeiture powers. They have repeatedly proposed new laws to allow the government to seize even more property and to violate even more rights. Talking about violating rights, I guess one of the clearest examples in the last decade of the government going far overboard is Waco. Waco has gotten back in the news in the last few months. Talking to an LP audience, I assume you all know most of the details. You all followed it from '93, and that you've got a lot better handle on it than the average person in the population. But there's some fresh stuff and a few new items that might be of interest and help put a different aspect on some of these aspects of this case. Now, back in early '93, the ATF could have easily arrested David Koresh, and after he was locked up, conducted a peaceful search of the Branch Davidian's home, because David Koresh was always going out jogging or on shopping trips or going to the bar to play his bad music. This is something, the fact that he came out like that, came out at the trial in early '94, and it kind of embarrassed the feds for about half of one news cycle. People didn't pay much attention. But recent FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, have turned out much more damning information. It turns out that 9 days before the February 28, 1993 raid, 2 undercover ATF agents, who Branch Davidians knew were undercover ATF agents because they were living in a house nearby and they had very fancy new cars and they had briefcases and they were in their 30s and 40s and they claimed to be college students. True story. True story. I mean, it was such a, well, anyhow, I will try to avoid obscenities here, but it was funny. But anyhow, the Branch Davidians recognized these folks as being undercover agents, from the get-go. And 9 days before the raid, 2 of these undercover ATF guys knocked on the door of the Branch Davidian residence and invited David Koresh to go target shooting. Well, David Koresh and 2 other Branch Davidians and the 2 agents proceeded to have a pleasant time, going out and shooting a couple of AR-15s, a .38 Super Pistol, a couple of semi-automatic pistols, and David Koresh provided much of the ammo for the plinking. This is something which only has come out in the last few months, and it makes such a wonderful mockery of all the efforts the feds made successfully in '93 and '94 to talk about the pathological hatred the Branch Davidians had towards law enforcement. Of course, they had to go in with massive force and military-style attack because these people couldn't be dealt with. Well, they can go target shooting with them, can't they? Now, on the final assault, the final tear gas and tank assault in the Branch Davidians, the Clinton administration worked very hard to portray that as like a routine law enforcement operation, except for the number of body bags needed afterwards. But going back through the record, it was clear, first it's clear that the gas that they used, which was prohibited for use in international warfare, which could not be used on Saddam Hussein's troops, but there was a loophole that allowed governments to use that gas on American people. Governments could use that gas on their own civilians, but not on foreign soldiers. And there's a lot of evidence that the gas may have paralyzed or even killed some people before the final fire. But late in the morning of April 19th, after the women, children, and men had been gassed for 4 hours and may have been practically paralyzed from the gas, the FBI tank drivers received the orders to bring down the building. And in the next hour, the tank smashed into the residence 8 times and collapsed 25% of the building. Huge parts of it just crashed down. The FBI's deputy director later admitted before Congress that the destruction of the building was part of the ultimate plan for bringing the siege to an end. I mean, they didn't have that much of a plan for getting the people out, but they definitely knew what they wanted to do with the building. Well, around noon, the fires broke out. Within a few minutes, the building was a raging inferno, and the FBI knew or should have known the Branch Davidians were using kerosene to heat the place and bales of hay and candles and stuff like that, and the building was very dry. Former federal lawyer David Hardy concluded from examining confidential FBI documents that there is some evidence suggesting that ending the siege by starting a fire was being considered by the FBI. The FBI had ended an earlier siege by using pyrotechnic rounds, firing them into the building, and maybe it was part of their plan here. Once the fire did start, the FBI stopped all the fire trucks far away from the building, claiming that they would be at risk if they went closer up. It turned out that the FBI's fire plan consisted simply of preventing fire trucks from going to the fire. Well, that night of April 19th, Attorney General Janet Reno went on Nightline and proudly announced that I made the decision, I'm accountable, the buck stops with me. She's famous for that phrase. It kind of made her place in history. But I was going back over the transcript, and there was another interesting thing here. Nightline host Ted Koppel asked Reno why the feds, quote, used tanks to ram the compound down. Janet Reno said, I think that what we were trying to do was to give everybody an opportunity to come out in the most unobtrusive way possible, not with a frontal assault. I mean, this is in the official transcript, for God's sake. I mean, just in case any of y'all were thinking of inviting Janet Reno for dinner, check your homeowner's insurance first. You know? On the following day, April 20th, 93, President Clinton had a press conference, and Clinton says, I was frankly surprised would be to hear that anyone would suggest that the Attorney General should resign because some fanatics murdered themselves. And according to a Federal News Service press transcript of that press conference, the press corps responded with applause. The press corps applauded this characterization by Clinton of the fanatics murdering themselves, and it was the White House press corps that with other media, that helped save Clinton at this very desperate time. A couple years later, Congress finally had the first substantive hearings on Waco, and Janet Reno testified before the House on August 1st, 1995. You know, I was going back to her testimony. She was far more enthusiastic in talking about her feelings than about explaining her decisions. And she was also very smug in her responses to the congressman. For instance, a confidential FBI report that Reno received before approving the gas attack said that the CS gas, the impact of the CS gas on infants cannot be ignored because there are no gas masks available for infants. And yet they gassed it for 6 hours. Congressman John Mica presented Reno with a gas mask to illustrate the point that could never have fit children, and Reno casually tossed the gas mask on the floor of the hearing room, and said, it's not very helpful in terms of trying to understand what happened here to just show gas masks. It's important to show the people that went into the process. And she got away with it. The highlight of Reno's testimony was her revelation that the 54-ton tanks that smashed into the Branch Davidians' residence should not be considered as military vehicles. Instead, they were, quote, like a good rent-a-car. Janet Reno, she added that it was wrong to focus on the, quote, on the menacing quality of the tanks since, quote, those tanks had been around. People inside knew about the tanks. I think they were accustomed to the tanks at that point. But the Branch Davidians were not accustomed to the tanks flattening their house. You know, I mean, it might seem like an arcane distinction, you know, but, you know, if you have a tank coming in your house, you view it differently. And it's interesting, as soon as those hearings ended, the issue of Waco died, practically. And official Washington pretended that it had never happened. A couple years later, the Women's Bar Association of the District of Columbia created a special award to honor the nation's first female Attorney General, and it was called the Janet Reno Torchbearer Award. I don't make this stuff up. And the first recipient was Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, and the award was presented by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, starting last August, some information has started to leak out about what really happened. We're getting a better handle on. Former CIA agent has said that Delta Force commandos were present up close and involved in the final day's attack on the Branch Davidians. Back in last year, the congressional investigators have been still trying to get the official records from the federal agencies of what happened, and it turns out a lot of federal agencies are invoking national security as a reason for not telling what they did at Waco. Dallas Morning News reported that the military has estimated that at least 6,000 pages of its documents are classified, and CIA, FBI, Treasury, ATF, and Justice Department officials have also indicated that their agencies have a number of secret documents relating to the standoff. There was the Texas Department of Public Safety late last year blocked the release of a report listing all the evidence that they had found after the fire because of the information contained military secrets. It's possible the military was testing new weapons against the American people there. I don't know, but it's possible. It came out in October that the FBI actually had 6 closed-circuit television cameras monitoring the Branch Davidians' home throughout the siege. This is the kind of information that could solve a lot of the questions about what happened. Well, it turned out the FBI didn't have any film in the cameras. So, which is what the ATF said about the film that they claimed from the original raid that showed the Branch Davidians fire first. Well, we forgot to put film in the cameras. That's a very common excuse these days.
Other information came out that FBI agents in Waco asked headquarters permission to shoot Branch Davidians who were leaving the building, even if they did not pose any direct threat to federal agents. Kind of just on principle. Now, a videotape taken by a military plane on the final day of the assault has come out from FOIA requests and elsewhere. It makes it look very likely that federal agents, either FBI or Delta Force operatives, were firing automatic weapons into the back of the Branch Davidians' home just before and during the fire, during the early part of the fire. It's not certain. I mean, they've agreed to do some tests. They're going to maybe add light, maybe not. But it looks very likely from the new Mike McNulty film, Waco, A New Revelation. McNulty was part of the team that did the Academy Award finalist movie, Waco Rules of Engagement, and his new movie is very good. So the scandal is really heated up, but it's amazing what the feds have been able to do to try to keep some bit of a handle on it. There was Janet Reno's credibility was shot to hell by early September. It's obvious a lot of things she'd said about Waco were simply not true. So Janet Reno decided that she should choose a special investigator to look into it. Janet Reno chose John Danforth, a golfing buddy of Bill Clinton's, and also one of the few GOP members to be rabidly opposed to assault weapons and in favor of the Brady Gun Act. He's a former senator. He's moderate. He's very respectable. Danforth, one of the first things he did was choose as his chief investigator federal attorney Edward Dowd out there in Missouri. Well, this is the same federal attorney who used federal funds last year to campaign against a state referendum to allow people to carry concealed weapons, which was not allowed by federal law. I mean, there's that glitch, the same thing the drug czar had out here. And it turned out that there was the Washington Times had a front page story announcing that this Dowd guy, this chief investigator, was under investigation by the Inspector General for this possible violation of federal law. Well, on the same day the Washington Times piece came out, the Justice Department announced the investigation was finished and he was cleared. No problems. I mean, that's a very fast turnaround. It's much more efficient than most governments work. Most government agencies work. Senator Kit Bond asked to see the official Inspector General report, and he was told that he could not see it because it was protected by the Privacy Act, since it was about Edward Dowd. And they got away with it. A few weeks ago, federal agents finally made sworn statements in court denying any shooting on the final day at Waco. But there was a hitch. There was a statement from the Pentagon. The Pentagon said that no one from the military or under its control fired any shots on April 19, 1993, based on currently available information. It's been 7 years, 7 years since the fire, and the Pentagon is still saying, well, as far as we know at the moment, I don't know that they've worked too hard trying to track that one down. There are some other developments coming in Waco. The civil trial is scheduled to start in May. The Supreme Court is going to be hearing the case of the Waco sentences because the federal judge added about 30 years to a bunch of the people who had relatively minor convictions. I think that's going to go badly for the federal government. Even if they lose, the Justice Department is going to get their nose bloodied, and the civil trial could be most entertaining. But it would be wrong to assume that problems like Waco have not had any effect on the federal government. FBI Chief Louis Freeh, for instance, he's very proud that since he took over the agency, the FBI has now adopted a formal course of ethics training for new agents. Mr. Freeh recently bragged that in the past 5 years, I've established core values for all FBI employees: obedience to the Constitution, compassion, fairness. At the same time, I've developed a bright line policies to which all FBI employees must adhere. Certain conduct will not be tolerated, including lying, cheating, stealing, sexual harassment, and alcohol and drug abuse. Unfortunately, there's not a bright line about shooting mothers holding babies in a cabin door. That was not on his list. Speaking of Ruby Ridge. But even with this ethics training, there is a hitch. There's a official study guide, FBI study guide for this course, and it states that subjects of FBI investigations, quote, have forfeited their right to the truth. And therefore, FBI agents are entitled to lie, deceive, or use other forms of deception when they're going after these people. This is what happened with Richard Joel. He was the security guard, and the FBI brought him in, and the FBI did not want to alert him that they were investigating him, so what they did is ask his help in making a training film. And so they had him sitting there, and he was being interrogated on their training film. They said, "Oh, don't worry about the questions. This is just for the training film." Louis Freeh was directly involved in that, but this is not part of his ethics problems. This is, this is how this stuff works. Now, the question, the federal government has become far more powerful and far more arrogant in the last 7 years. What has the Clinton administration meant for the future of this country? Nowadays, we have a two-class system in America: those who the law fails to bind and those who the law fails to protect. Those for whom there is, quote, no controlling legal authority, in Vice President Gore's famous words, and those for whom there are few, if any, constitutional protections. Bill Clinton's greatest legacy is the principle of government supremacy. Clinton did more than any other recent president to put the government on a pedestal, to put it above the laws, beyond any effective restraint. Clinton has ignored Supreme Court decisions that limited his power, such as the decision on affirmative action in 1995. He just pretended it didn't happen. Congress rarely has had the gumption to check his abuses. Clinton has exploited and expanded the dictatorial potential of the U.S. presidency. As Clinton's reign is ending, representative government has become ever more of a parody of the intentions of America's founding fathers. America is becoming a nation with more and more subjects and fewer citizens. Far more citizens have willingly become wards of the state, both depending on it for their next meal and foregoing their own duty to keep an eye on what their government is up to. But the surest effect of exalting government is to make it easier for some people to drag other people down. Americans must recognize that government is and will always be an iron fist. Once people have a clear picture of government, what government is, they'll understand why government is so dangerous and why government must be leashed and curbed like any other predator. Thanks.
That was just great. Thank you so much. We are running behind schedule, but I do want to take, I want Jim Bovard to take a couple of quick questions. We're holding up the speaking program just to get a couple of very quick questions. So come right up to the floor, Mike, if you would. Just three or four questions. Thank you.
I'm going to have to answer this question tomorrow night, but you've just illustrated an awful lot of the wrongs that are going on in this country today. What would you say in a quick version would be the answer to correcting those wrongs?
There is no quick answer. That's the sad part. I mean, people need a fundamental change in the attitude towards government itself. And it's not just government power here, there, or elsewhere. It's across the board. People need to radically reevaluate the power they've given to politicians to intrude in their lives. So, I mean, it's nice if we could change forfeiture. It'd be nice if we could get rid of the drug laws, stuff like that. But there has to be a profound change that goes far beyond that. So, yeah.
James, I remember reading some time ago about, this was when Whitewater was first becoming an issue. A reporter in Little Rock was assaulted outside his hotel room, so he claimed, and was robbed, and it turned out that nothing was taken except the notes that he was working on. I was just wondering, with all the writing that you do, and you're very effective in exposing a lot of government wrongdoing and corruption, have you ever encountered any attempts at intimidation or physical violence or anything that made you personally afraid of?
Well, those are different questions. Well, no, I mean, there have been attempts at intimidation, but it didn't make me personally afraid. I mean, well, I'll try to be polite in my language here, but physical violence, no. I mean, I did some writing on the East Europe when I was traveling around in some of the communist countries there and had some problems, but that was part of the trade. No, well, there's other things I'd rather not say in public, though. So that's a good question. Yeah.
You mentioned two events that have had a traumatic effect on my life personally, the Waco situation and Ruby Ridge. As a civil rights activist and a fighter for Soviet Jewry over these many, many years, and persons who have had difficulty with the FBI, etc., in my group, I'm wondering where you mark a distinction in your own mind as to the responsibility of a Mr. Koresh or Mr. Weaver regarding those young children that they had in their premises with them. I mean, if it was a 50-day siege at Waco, did it ever occur to you personally that he might have taken some responsibility and said, okay, we want to have a shootout with Uncle Sam, let's send the children out.
Well, it's important to look at what happened to people that were sent out. The people that were sent out in the first days. In the first days of the siege, there were a number of very old folks who came out. There was like, I think, a 77-year-old lady who came out, and what the feds did was slap her in leg irons and handcuffs and a bright orange suit and accuse her of murder because she was a party to, she was inside, so therefore everybody inside was going to be charged with murder, even if they were 77-year-old ladies. And another reason that the people inside did not come out was as soon as the people came out, of the people that did come out, the feds seized their personal Bibles. And that was something that really resonated intensely. There were so many things that the government did to show bad faith early on, and the feds were, it was very shortly after the start of the siege that the tactical side took over and started blasting the loud music and have the tanks go in and smash the children's tricycles and smash the cars and smash the Branch Davidian cemetery. I'm certainly not saying the Branch Davidians were poster boys. I've always focused my comments focusing on the wrongful aspects of government action. I have not said what the Branch Davidians were doing was honorable or what they were doing, or I've never said their hands were clean. But seeing how the feds mistreated the first people who came out, you can understand why other people wouldn't come out.
But specifically focusing on those kids, if you could draw a distinction, did he have the moral right to maintain that situation for 50 days, keep those kids inside that building, not send them out? And in regard to Ruby Ridge, Randy Weaver himself, it seems to me personally, because I've had this battle with Uncle Sam for a long period of time, is when you defy the federal government, when you say this mountain is my mountain, and thou shalt not come up this mountain because I own this mountain.
Which is not what Randy Weaver said.
No, but he basically said, okay, this is where I draw the line. You understand what I'm saying?
Randy Weaver did not shoot at anybody. It was a federal agent who shot his 14-year-old boy in the back. Yeah. It was federal agents with submachine guns and camouflage who ambushed his son and killed his dog and then started a firefight. I mean, I don't know what you expect people to do with the federal agents.
Does Randy Weaver bear any responsibility for the death of his son and the death of his wife?
It's the federal government. It was federal snipers hiding 200 yards away who made the decision to shoot down, to take a shot that he should have known and very well may have known was going to kill a mother standing there in the doorway. Lon Horiuchi had a 10-power scope from 200 yards. You get damn good resolution at that distance. And I'm not saying Randy Weaver's a poster boy. And Randy Weaver, I think in his 1995 Senate testimony, said that he wished he had done some things differently. But the feds don't have a right to go in and kill mothers and children simply because someone doesn't bow down to an entrapment charge, which is what Weaver was facing. And Weaver was also sent the wrong date for the court appearance. The feds knew that, but they still set up this massive U.S. Marshal Service process to get him. Anyhow.
Jim, I was struck by your remark about Clinton as the worst or most abusive president we've had in recent times.
Recent times, yeah.
And I've had a long-standing kind of friendly discussion with a friend who maintains that Clinton is, in terms of damage done to our rights and liberties in the Constitution, et cetera, the worst president ever. And I have said, no, I think that honor, if you can call it that, still goes to Franklin D. Roosevelt. What would you say?
It's a damn good question. That is a question I've also wrestled with. I don't think we should forget Abraham Lincoln, though.
Of course not.
Now, there was so much damage done to Roosevelt, and part of the thing that's upsetting is that both with Roosevelt, to see what happened after Roosevelt did so many things that were clearly illegal and unconstitutional. Congress struck down very few of them, even after he was out of power. And I'm concerned the same pattern will show itself with Bill Clinton, that Congress will not have the gumption to roll back a lot of his power grabs. So I'm selling a book out here, Shakedown, $5 a copy. Got there in the back if people want them. Bovard Light, good for laughs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job. Great job.
Thank you very much. I hope you're going to stick around so that people can... okay, great. So Jim will be here if anyone wants to grab him one-on-one. But we've got to start this afternoon program immediately. Sally Pipes is going to be next door in ballrooms 1 through 4. And we've got Jim Lark's Campus Organizing Workshop in San Diego 1. And Sue Reams from the Families to Amend California's 3 Strikes in San Diego 2. Right away. Thank you, folks.
consistent, or are you going to take out some breaks?